Hey, this is Mrs. Reichelt, and we are moving into memorizing some of the major muscles of the body. So before we get started, I do have a skeletal muscle notes sheet. You don't have to use it, but it is um, a table, sort of like the kind that I gave you for memorizing all of the tissues, but it basically goes through each of the muscles. There's its own little table for each of them. The muscle names are already printed out in each section, and then all you have to fill in is the group, the description, and then from there the origin, insertion, and the action. So if you would prefer to just write all of these out on your notes, that's fine. There are 4 pages, I think 4 pages full of them, so it might be beneficial for some of you to go ahead and fill out the notes key as we go through these. It's not required, but it might help you out. Okay, so first of all here, we're going to start with the frontalis. The frontalis group is a facial muscle. So it's a part of the facial muscles. The description is that it covers the frontal bone. So I think that's pretty obvious. Frontalis, frontal bones right here. And then the origin, I'm just going to put O because it's easier. The origin is going to be the cranial aponeuroses. So the origin of the frontalis is the cranial aponeuroses, and remember the aponeuroses is they're those sheet-like connective tissue that are different from tendons, so they're flattened and sheet-like. The insertion, so that's the origin. The insertion is going to be the skin of the eyebrow. And the primary action is that it's going to raise the eyebrow. And I'm going to go ahead and erase all of this and move on to the next one. Okay, so next up we have the Orbicularis Oculi, and that's this circular muscle right around the eye. And the Orbicularis Oculi is also a facial muscle. It's part of the facial group. The description is that they have fibers that run in circles around the eye. So the fibers run in circles around the eye. The origin has two origins here. The origins include the frontal bone, so the frontal bone, and also the maxilla are included. And then the insertion include the tissues that are around the eye, and the function or the primary action is that it'll blink and close the eye. So next up here is the Orbicularis Oris. So we're moving into this one, the Orbicularis Oris. This is also a facial muscle. So the group is a facial muscle. This is the kissing muscle. That's the description. Okay. The origin is going to be the mandible and the maxilla. And then the insertion is going to be the skin and muscles around mouth. So I'm going to write that up here. So the insertion is the skin and muscles around the mouth. Okay, and then the primary action So the action is it's going to close and protrude lip, and it's also going to be that motion like if you were whistling. Okay, so far we've gone through Frontalis, Orbicularis Oculi, Orbicularis Oris. Let's see, I think let's go through the Zygomaticus. Okay, so the Zygomaticus is going to be here and here. When you actually go through and color your study guide, there is a major and a minor. But as far as you need to know, you just got to know that there is a Zygomaticus. This is also a part of the facial classification. And the description is that it's going to span from the cheek to the lip. And then the origin is the zygomatic bone. And then the insertion is going to be the skin and muscle at the corner of your lip. And then let's see, primary action. So it's going to help you to smile. And raises the corners of your mouth. So it raises the corners of your mouth there. Next up, okay, so now let's go ahead and go in through the buccinator. So the buccinator is a facial and a chewing muscle. It's going to run horizontally across the cheek. The origin is the maxilla and the mandible. Whoa, I'm spelling things really wrong here. So that's Maxilla and Mandible. And then the insertion of the buccinator is going to be the Orbicularis Oris. And then the major function, or the primary function here, is to compress the cheek. Sort of like a sucking motion. Could also help to whistle. Okay, so next up, let's go ahead and do the masseter. So the masseter is also a chewing muscle, kind of moving from facial to chewing here. So the masseter covers the angle of the lower jaw. In addition, its origin is going to be the temporal bone. The insertion is going to be the mandible, and it's going to close the jaw. Okay, then we can go ahead and do the temporalis. Okay, so the temporalis, this is also going to be a chewing bone. Okay, it's a fan shaped, as you can kind of tell, it kind of fans out like that. So it's fan shaped, and it overlies the temporal bone. That's hopefully obvious. The origin is the temporal bone. The insertion is the mandible. And it's also going to close the jaw. Okay, so next up here, let's go ahead and go through the platysma. The platysma is a neck muscle, and it is sheet-like, and the origin, I'm going to write it up here, the origin are the tissues of the chest, and then the insertion is the tissue around the mouth. And a major function here is that it tenses your neck, and this would be like if you were shaving, or if you were frowning, or your sad face. Okay, so that's going to be that action. And then our last one here is the sternocleidomastoid, and this is a paired muscle. It's also going to be a neck muscle still. The origin is the sternum and clavicle. The insertion is the mastoid process. And remember, the mastoid process is on the temporal bone. So if it on a test, if it says temporal bone, you gotta know that that's gonna be the bone in which the mastoid process is on. And then the function is it's going to flex the neck and help to rotate the head. So that wraps up our head and neck muscles.